At first, they laughed. Radar ghosts, they called it. A rumor passed between exhausted crews flying night routes over black water and darker jungle. One American aircraft, alone, hunting in the dark. No formation, no flares, no escorts, just one machine that wasn't supposed to be there. Then, 4 bombers vanished in 80 minutes. No distress calls, no debris fields spotted at dawn, no survivors to explain what happened, only silence, and the growing fear that something unseen had learned how to find them in the dark. This is not a myth. This is not propaganda. This is a dark war record of the night the Japanese realized they were no longer alone in the sky. The first thing everyone noticed was the size. The P-61 Black Widow didn't look like a fighter. It looked like a mistake. Twin engines. Twin tails. A wide, heavy body that seemed too large to stalk anything quietly. Japanese air crews believed fighters had to be small, agile, visible. Something you could hear coming. Something you could outturn. The Black Widow did none of that. It hunted at night. It didn't need moonlight. It didn't need searchlights. It could see without being seen. The first encounter wasn't even recognized as an attack. A Japanese bomber formation crossed the coastline after midnight. Engines steady, crews relaxed. They had flown this route dozens of times. American defenses were predictable. Searchlights first. Then flak. Then maybe a fighter that arrived too late. None of that happened. The sky stayed dark. Then, one bomber fell out of formation. No explosion, no tracer fire. It simply dropped. The crew thought it was engine failure. They kept flying. Minutes later, another aircraft vanished. Radio calls went unanswered. No warning, no sound. Only an empty space where an aircraft had been moments before. The formation tightened. Gunners scanned the darkness, fingers stiff on triggers, eyes straining against shadows that refused to shape themselves into threats. That's when the radar operator on the P-61 spoke quietly. Contact. 12 o'clock. Slightly below. The pilot didn't respond. He didn't need to. The Black Widow slid forward through the night. Engines throttled back, its dark paint swallowing moonlight. The bomber ahead never knew it was being followed. At less than 300 yards, the nose guns opened fire. 4 cannons. Heavy machine guns. The bomber came apart before the crew understood they were under attack. The P-61 pulled away instantly. No chase, no celebration. Just disappearance. In the Japanese formation, panic crept in. Gunners fired blindly into the dark. Pilots changed altitude without orders. Still, nothing appeared. They couldn't fight what they couldn't see. The third bomber was hit from below. Rounds ripped through the fuel tanks. Fire blossomed, lighting the clouds for a split second. Just long enough for the remaining crews to glimpse something massive sliding past their wingtip. Not a fighter. A shadow with engines. Radio discipline broke. Voices overlapped. Shouting replaced procedure. Enemy night fighter. Unknown type. Very large. The transmission cut off. Back in the P-61 cockpit, the radar scope showed another target. The fourth bomber tried to run. It dove. Engines screaming. Crew abandoning formation entirely. The Black Widow followed without urgency. It didn't need speed. It already owned the night. At close range, the final burst was short and controlled. The bomber disappeared into cloud and fire. 80 minutes. 4 aircraft gone. No flak fired. No American losses. No witnesses left to explain what happened. By morning, Japanese commanders were furious and confused. No searchlights had reported contact. No ground units claimed kills. No fighter squadrons reported engagement. Yet 4 bombers were missing. That night, a new order circulated quietly. Avoid night operations when possible. Fly higher. Fly faster. Fly together. But fear doesn't listen to orders. And somewhere in the dark, the Black Widow was already airborne again. Waiting. By the second night, the sky felt different. Not darker, emptier. Japanese bomber crews flew with every light extinguished, cockpits sealed in silence except for the hum of engines and the pounding of blood in their ears. Searchlights were no longer comforting. They felt like beacons, inviting death. The P-61 didn't care. It hunted by pulse and echo, by shapes that existed only on a glowing radar scope. The Japanese had no answer for that. They tried altitude. Bombers climbed higher, believing height meant safety. The Black Widow followed from below, invisible, its radar operator guiding it like a blind predator sensing heat. Closing, range decreasing. The pilot nudged the throttle. At night, speed was dangerous. Too much, and you overshot the kill. Too little, and you became predictable. The first bomber that night never saw the attack. Cannon fire tore through the wing root. The aircraft rolled once and vanished. No explosion, just gravity reclaiming metal. The escorts arrived too late. Zeros and Tojos circled the area, firing at shadows, engines whining in frustration. They couldn't find it. The P-61 had already faded into cloud, radar switched off, crew listening to enemy radios explode with panic. The Japanese tried a new tactic: decoys. Single bombers sent ahead to draw out the attacker. It didn't work. The Black Widow ignored isolated targets and waited for formations. It wanted efficiency. The third kill that night happened over open water. The bomber tried to dive away. The P-61 followed, steady, controlled, unhurried. At close range, the gunner in the dorsal turret fired upward into the belly of the aircraft. The bomber disintegrated from the inside out. The fourth engagement almost failed. Anti-aircraft fire from coastal batteries reached higher than expected. Flak bursts forced the P-61 to maneuver. One shell rocked the aircraft. Alarms flickered, but the pilot held course. The bomber ahead began to climb, too late. A final burst of cannon fire severed the tail. The aircraft spiraled down, burning. That made 4 more in 2 nights. Japanese intelligence finally acknowledged the truth. This wasn't chance. This wasn't mechanical failure. This was a night fighter, and not one they recognized. Orders went out to hunt it. Fighter patrols were assigned to night duty, something they had almost no training for. Pilots hated it. They felt blind. They were. The Black Widow waited, because the moment the hunters became targets, the advantage shifted again. The sky no longer belonged to those who could fly best. It belonged to those who could see first. And in the dark, the P-61 was unmatched. The third night was different, too organized, too deliberate. The Japanese had stopped reacting. Now they were planning. Radar stations along the coast were ordered to stay silent. No lights, no warnings. Fighter units were placed at staggered altitudes, engines idling in the dark, pilots told to wait, not to chase bombers, but to listen. Listen for something heavier than a fighter. Something that didn't belong. The Black Widow lifted off, unaware of the trap. Its crew sensed tension anyway. The radar scope showed clutter, false echoes, weather interference, too many returns overlapping. Someone was trying to confuse them. The first contact appeared suddenly, close and fast, range short, closing rapidly. The pilot banked hard. Tracer fire flashed past the cockpit, green, then red. A Japanese fighter had come in low and silent, using the P-61's own blind spot. The dorsal gunner reacted instantly. A burst upward. The fighter vanished into darkness, but the message was clear. They were no longer alone. More contacts appeared. High, low, behind. The Japanese were hunting the hunter. The P-61 dove into cloud, engines throttled back to reduce noise. For 30 seconds there was nothing. Then flak. Not heavy, but accurate. Shells burst just ahead of the aircraft, walking closer. The crew realized what was happening. The fighters weren't trying to kill them. They were hurting them, forcing the Black Widow toward a kill zone. The pilot made a decision that went against training. He turned into the fire, straight toward the coast. Radar went dark. No emissions. The P-61 became just another shadow. Japanese fighters overshot, confused by the sudden disappearance. One stayed behind, too curious, too confident. The radar came back on for 3 seconds. Just enough. The pilot rolled inverted and dropped behind the fighter. The gun spoke once. The fighter fell away, burning. The trap collapsed. Japanese units broke formation, firing wildly, unsure where the threat had gone. The Black Widow escaped inland, damaged but alive. That night, only 1 bomber was lost. But it was enough, because the Japanese learned something terrifying. They could hurt it. They could pressure it, but they still couldn't control the night. And the P-61 learned something too. It was no longer invisible. The war had entered a new phase. Hunter versus hunter. And neither side could afford mistakes anymore. After the ambush failed, the night stopped feeling neutral. It felt hostile. Every sortie carried the weight of expectation on both sides. The Japanese were no longer dismissing the threat. They were reshaping their entire night doctrine around it. Bombers flew higher and faster, sacrificing accuracy for survival. Fighter escorts stayed closer, burning fuel they couldn't afford to waste. Searchlights were used sparingly now, not to find the enemy, but to confuse it. The Black Widow adapted too. It stopped hunting immediately. For 2 nights, it did nothing. No interceptions, no radar contacts, no wrecks in the water. Japanese crews exhaled for the first time in days. Then the attacks resumed. Different this time. The P-61 waited near choke points, coastlines, mountain passes, predictable return routes. It didn't chase bombers outbound. It caught them tired, damaged, and low on fuel. 1 bomber limped home with a dead engine. The Black Widow slid into position beneath it, matching speed perfectly. The gunner held fire. They waited until the bomber began its descent. Then the cannons opened. The aircraft disintegrated just short of the coastline, crashing where ground crews could see it burn. The message was unmistakable. You are not safe, even at home. Japanese night fighters finally scored a hit. A lucky burst clipped the P-61's tail during a chaotic engagement over jungle terrain. The aircraft shuddered violently. Control response went soft. For a moment, it looked like the Black Widow would be lost, not to enemy fire, but to the dark itself. The pilot fought at back level, flying by instinct and memory, engines screaming in protest. They landed with inches to spare. Ground crews counted the damage in silence. The aircraft could still fly. Barely. Command considered pulling it back. The answer came before the decision was made. Another Japanese bombing group launched that night, and the Black Widow went with it. This time, it hunted aggressively. No patience. No restraint. 2 bombers were destroyed within minutes of each other, one from below, one from behind. A third escaped only because the P-61's guns jammed. The crew cleared the malfunction mid-air, hands moving automatically in the dark. They didn't talk. There was nothing left to say. By the end of the night, Japanese operations were disrupted across the sector. Missions aborted. Formations scattered. Fighter escorts burned fuel chasing nothing. The psychological toll mounted. Pilots reported hearing engines that weren't there. Gunners fired at clouds. Crews refused to fly without escorts, even when none were available. The Black Widow had done more than destroy aircraft. It had infected the night with doubt, and doubt spread faster than any radar signal. By now, the Japanese command stopped asking what the aircraft was. They asked how long it could stay in the air, because nothing that hunted like that could be human for very long. Night operations were reduced to necessity only. Some missions were canceled without explanation. Others launched with crews already convinced they wouldn't return. The P-61 had changed the rhythm of the war. The sky no longer belonged to whoever dared to fly it. It belonged to whoever could wait. Japanese strategy shifted one final time. No more formations. No more predictable routes. Bombers were sent alone, staggered, silent, hoping isolation would make them harder to detect. It backfired. The Black Widow thrived on isolation. A single radar contact was easier to read. Easier to track. Easier to kill. One bomber flew for nearly an hour without seeing another aircraft. The crew thought they were safe. Then the cockpit filled with tracer fire from nowhere. The aircraft broke apart before the pilot could even speak. Another tried flying just above treetop level, believing terrain would hide it. The P-61 followed from above, radar painting the shape perfectly. At the last moment, it dropped behind the bomber and fired upward. The explosion lit the jungle like lightning. That night, 3 more bombers were lost. Japanese pilots stopped calling them losses. They called them disappearances, because there was no warning, no fight, no chance. Only the realization, afterward, that something had been there. The Black Widow crew felt the strain now. Sleep came in fragments. Hands shook when engines stopped. Every shadow felt closer than it should. They had become what the enemy feared, and that knowledge weighed heavier than any aircraft damage. The final Japanese countermeasure was desperate. They tried silence. No radios, no flak, no searchlights, just empty sky. For a moment, it worked. The P-61's radar showed nothing but noise. Then, slowly, one shape emerged, steady, deliberate. A bomber returning home. The Black Widow slid into position and waited. It didn't rush. It had learned patience from the night itself. At close range, the guns fired one last time. The bomber vanished. The crew returned to base without speaking. They didn't need to count anymore. The message had been delivered. The Japanese night bombing campaign in that sector effectively ended. Not because of losses alone, but because fear had made flying impossible. By the time the sky finally grew quiet, no one announced it. There was no message saying the threat was gone. No order declaring the night safe again. The bombers simply stopped coming. Japanese operations in the sector collapsed not from total destruction, but from exhaustion and fear. Crews refused night assignments. Fighters burned fuel without finding targets. Radar stations reported nothing, because there was nothing left to send. The P-61 flew its last patrol without contact. No radar blips, no shadows, no engines hiding in cloud, just empty darkness. The Black Widow returned to base at dawn, landing as it always had. Heavy, scarred, carrying the weight of nights no one on the ground would ever fully understand. It was never celebrated. Night fighters rarely were. Their victories left no wrecks for cameras, no witnesses to confirm bravery. Only missing aircraft. Empty chairs. Silence where radio calls should have been. When the war ended, the P-61 was quietly retired. Jets were coming. Speed mattered more than patience now, but every modern night-fighting doctrine carried its mark. Radar-led interception. Hunter-killer coordination. The idea that darkness was no longer protection. That belonged to the Black Widow. Japanese post-war records would later confirm what crews had whispered in fear. They never knew how many aircraft hunted them. They never knew where it was coming from. Only that once it appeared, escape was unlikely. 4 bombers in 80 minutes wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what followed. The realization that night, once a shield had turned against them. The pilot never spoke publicly about those missions. He didn't describe kills. He didn't claim credit. When asked what made the P-61 different, he said only this: it could wait. That was the truth. The Black Widow didn't dominate the sky through speed or numbers. It won by patience, by silence, by understanding that fear grows strongest when nothing can be seen. And when the war ended, the night returned to what it had been before. Dark, quiet, unaware of how close it once came to becoming a weapon forever. This was not a story of glory. It was a record of disappearance. And in war, those are the stories that last the longest.